Hey everybody, my name is Greg. I'm one of the co-founders at Sprinter and also ChainSafe. And going to talk to you a little bit today about solving, but more from the solver market side and kind of like the distribution, and get into some statistics about like what's really happening behind the scenes. A little bit about us. So we're a solving team, quite competitive. We're in like top 3, top 5 cow swap, specifically on like more of the exotic assets as well, and we do a lot of cross-chain solving. Our core focus is to basically build out tooling that we will be the #1 consumers of and ensure that it can then be extended and used for other solvers. We're trying to build things that have utility day one and can be extended to other participants as well, with a big focus on UX on the research side. So, some quick things. I'm not going to cover intents. We can ignore that. I just want to cover some like semantics on solving. There's kind of like 2 main jobs that exist for a solver. Solvers typically do pathfinding, or what you might hear commonly as like the solving portion of things. That's the idea of routing, a complex transaction, whether it's through multiple, different liquidity sources. So you have token A like USDC, and you want, ETH. What's the best way to route through multiple different pools to get it? That's kind of like the idea of solving. You're finding that path. And then there's filling. Filling's the idea of simply just like fulfilling a transaction, executing it. It might mean you add your own liquidity. It might mean you're using external liquidity, or just simply on-chain liquidity. Those are like the 2 core jobs of solvers and fillers. Some people have built businesses around the solving side. So like a Li-Fi, for example, they do a lot of the actual, what's the best route to do your action. Other people like us provide like, API access points so that you can get some of these routes privately. On the filling side, this is usually not something you see very often as a service. It's typically something that people they offer out, right? So this is like people on some of the top platforms going and doing it, and just fulfilling transactions for you. But let's talk about the markets, because that's really what I want to hone in on here, and kind of the discrepancies. So if you're familiar with the intent space, solving, there's kind of like, these are like the 3 top ones you've probably used in the last, if you're on chain, you probably use them pretty frequently. SwapX, CowSwap, Across. The top 2 do your cross-chain, do your swapping, so you can get like better price protection, MEV resistance, things like that. Across, you probably use as the default way to move your funds between 2 chains. There are like 30, 40 other amazing companies in here as well. There's people like Relay, as I said, Li-Fi. I'm not going to list them all, but they all facilitate the same ones. And we, solve on a bunch of them as well. And that's kind of our goals at Sprinter. But what we need to start looking at is understanding, sorry, I just don't have the stuff on my screen, is to understand like basically how this market's been evolving. In the last like year and a half, we've started to notice that the actual usage of swaps has really moved away from front ends. Intent markets are starting to actually take over quite dramatically on the total usage here. You can see that by the green. So the green here is intent markets. So that's like the emergence of CowSwap, the emergence of these other ones. They're starting to dominate because users are getting better price impact. When you use CowSwap, you most of the time don't have to worry about Jared sandwiching you, and that's a good thing, right? And a lot of the time you get surplus. A lot of solvers optimize to give you a surplus because they're in an auction trying to win the bid to get like 1 BPS from you, because it's effectively a market maker game. 1 BPS spread, I like, it's okay. It's not that bad. And so these markets have slowly been like taking over. What we're also starting to see is the intent bridging space. And I think this is like the really interesting one, because we're going to start to see this both grow dramatically in total bridge market, but start to eclipse on the intent side. It's really going to eclipse the rest of the bridges. When we talk other bridges, I'm talking the message-based ones. This is like the mint and burn assets, so like your layer 0 OFT, your sockets, those that like even Hyperlane that go and mint and burn those assets between chains, or canonical. Intents are basically everything else. So that's your Across, your Relay. In just the last year alone, we've literally like doubled multiple times, month over month. Currently, we're sitting at 35 to 40% of the total bridge market space is dominated by solving. That's roughly about $7 to $10 billion a month, moves every day over intents. The remainder in the bridge market space, dollar value. I don't know about today. My stats are from like, ETH 3000. And this is starting to grow dramatically, and it's about to grow really hard with the rise of AA. Specifically, account abstraction adoption is sub 1%. We're talking like very low adoption today. But what's going to happen to the entire bridge market is that pretty much the max potential increase on intents is honestly going to be dictated by the account abstraction space. If for every 1% the account abstraction market share grows, there will be close to a full 1x increase on the total load of the intent space. The reason for this is accounts like One Balance, the Magic Spends, that rely on these resource locks are fully required to have solvers to run through all their transactions. And I can illustrate this really easily. It'll be cheaper for a user to put their funds on an L2 and to have a solver deal with batching and other magic behind the scenes to facilitate the transfer of ETH, normal ETH, on the L1 from one address to another. The 21K gas fee that it costs to do it on L1 will be cheaper to hold your funds in an L2 and to have someone else to have a solver actually broker that transfer for you. It'll always be that way, and it's going to move to that way. And so the total load of this space of the intent cross-chain space is going to quite literally eclipse. The minute we see double-digit adoption post-Pectra, probably in the fall, we'll start to see the intent bridging space go up probably upwards, max load in the maybe 100 B monthly. And that's not too crazy to think about when you think about that DeFi is like 150 B monthly to begin with. It's all going to grow with it together. But who's actually doing the work? And this is where things get kind of fun. These are the teams working on CowSwap. Our solver is called Project Blanc. These are the active ones today. There's many amazing teams that are actively solving. And these teams in CowSwap compete in an auction. They simply just are competing on the best price. But when we start to see the distribution in CowSwap, we see it's actually getting pretty good. And I know this is kind of messy and hard to read, but if you notice, for the most part, you see the big jagged lines, there's lots of them. That's a very healthy ratio. That means that the competition's working. It means that we're commoditizing solving. Solving is getting to the point, at least on the AMM side, that we're all finding very similar prices, and we're getting users truly the best price. Because if it was only one, you could assume either it's a lot of private liquidity, or that there's really being dominated by for the fact that nobody is actually sophisticated enough to actually pull this off and get users the prices they need. It starts to get a bit hairy, though, when we start to look at Uniswap X. The big pink one, this is Wintermute. This is basically because they're able to funnel direct SEX liquidity in. That's fundamentally why. But Wintermute dominates, on average, 40, 70%, depending on the month, the day. They really own Uniswap X volume. Uniswap X is also new, and we can't knock them too hard. It's gonna get better, but the auction mechanisms aren't the same. CowSwap has a really nice competitive market. They've done a lot of work on the auction. We don't have the same thing in Uniswap. Now it starts to let's get into cross-chain where it gets even hairier. What we're seeing here is the average input amount, so the denoted chart. The higher it goes, that's the higher amount. The middle is 100K, so 100K USD. And what you're seeing is at the bottom how many seconds it takes to fill a cross-chain order. And what you'll notice, there's a few blips at the beginning. This is because we have to wait for the block times on L2s, a couple seconds to go by. We get most of the low volume stuff in. That's everything under 10K. The highest mark is about 15K. 60 seconds, 90 seconds, and 120 mean greater than. So it's greater than 120. Most of the volume that you do, if you go anything over 10K, it's not getting transferred. You'll never have it land faster than that 4-second window that all these intent bridges claim that you're going to get. And there's a reason for it. The distribution of who's actually doing your jobs. What we're seeing is the line. That is the number of solvers participating in the auction given volume ranges. So up to $10 to $100, we have the most amount of solvers competing because it's very cheap and very easy to fill, and they're willing to risk it for the biscuit, But But as we start to get anything over 10K, it falls off and goes under 20 solvers. And by the time you actually get to the 100K mark, we basically have 2 to 3 people filling, we have 3 people filling all transfers. And this is across data for what it's worth. They're the most lenient on giving us the addresses of who relayers are. Everyone else, it's a black box, and usually 1 solver, or 2. But let's double down a little bit more. Here we have the top 3 relayers in across. We have relayer 1, which is blue. We should note this is the across relayer run by the Risk Labs team. So this is basically saying if nobody fills the order, they will just go and take it to make the protocol move. And the problem persists. You can see orders over 1K. They are taking on a huge share. And they continue to take on a huge share over 10K, all the way upwards of 1 mil. And we actually see the all is the really thin gray line. So it basically, everyone that tries to be competitive in the cross-chain world basically is not competitive at all. It's like really hard. And what does this look like compared to CowSwap, right? On CowSwap and Uniswap X, we saw really good distribution. We saw lots of people competing healthy. And it really comes down to one thing. And I'll tell you that one thing in a second. I get a lot of questions. Why is CowSwap competitive? Because nerds love auctions and they love playing whack-a-mole. AMMs are a sophisticated game of whack-a-mole. You know, our team internally at Project Blanc, they basically are always saying, what the hell is Copium Capital doing today? They stole our route that we always win. And they're going and analyzing their transactions for the next 6 hours to figure out what optimization they found. And then we go and take it back. And then 2 days later, they take it back. It's fun, it's exciting, they like it, it's technical. Cross-chain is not. Cross-chain sucks. Cross-chain, you have to hold inventory. You have high revert risk because L2s, you're competing on gas. It's like the days of the keeper bots in Maker. You know, you're bidding on liquidations, and you're just like outbidding until you actually land as the only one in the block. Settlement times. Most intent protocols will settle and repay you back anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour, and some won't even do it until 7 days because you have to go through the canonical bridge from the L2 back to the L1, meaning you're out inventory for a very, very long time. Better yet, most teams don't have an accounting team. They don't have anybody doing delta neutral strategies like futures, and so when ETH wicked $1,000 down in the last month, we basically saw a lot of solvers nuke their profits for 3 months. And that's because they were just stuck holding the wrong asset for too long. And that's because you have to make a bet. What chain do I go on with what asset on what day at what hour? Because you have no idea that Blast just launched a new liquidity mining campaign and it's just WBTC because that's what's hot. You got to make the bets. Order flow is also king. I'm running out of time. Anyway, 6 seconds. So one of the things we're doing at Sprinter is to fix a lot of these problems in the cross-chain space, and that's what we're going to be doing. Thank you. I'm out of time.